the environmental. Yeah, faculty in the environmental studies department. I met Aeryn 2 years ago now. She took a couple soils classes from me. I thought she was a senior then, and she was only a sophomore. So, and I have to say, you did great in my classes. You learned and worked on composting 2 years ago, and it's nice to see you're following through with that. Aeryn comes to us from Northern California, double major in environmental studies and French. So I assume you're gonna present in French.
I've done that, but not today. All right, thank you so much. Thank you for the introduction. I'm Aeryn Garvisch, and this is my presentation titled Composting 101, the Ecological Art of Decay, Groundwork for Balance, Respect, and Connection. So, composting is commonly known as the managed decomposition of organic matter. But for the purposes of this project, and to kind of attract people, I've been calling it the ecological art of decay. And that is to emphasize how it's more than just the managed decomposition of organic matter. It's a creative, transformative, and intrinsic process linking death, decay, renewal, and regeneration growth in the environment. To start out, composting happens like within and on top of the soil. And the soil is a living complex composed of minerals, gases, water, micro, macroorganisms, dead stuff, living stuff. It's really the medium on which all life occurs on this planet. And a compost pile, the product of compost, is a unique and ephemeral soil entity. And so that's a picture of what a compost pile can look like. Right, and then a bit about the soil food web, because they're really the ones running this whole show. Soil is not dirt. Dirt is basically just rock dust, while soil is full of life. And I think the distinction between the two needs to be clear when we're talking about soil. Soil settles into layers called horizons between the atmosphere and the bedrock. And the soil food web is the biotic component of soil, and it's most prolific in the O layer, the humus, and the topsoil. And so, like, this is the O layer, all of the living organic stuff, and like just right kind of here is like humus, and that is a really high concentration of decayed or partially decayed organic matter. And this is the topsoil. So that stuff is going to be really rich in nutrients, and it's going to ideally be full of life. And the soil food web is a really all-encompassing kind of description for a lot of organisms that live in and around the soil. It can include microscopic bacteria, algae, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, microarthropods, earthworms, insects, small vertebrates, plant roots, and so much more. It's really full of life, as you can see. And so, zooming out to look at soil, it happens within the context of things that are called biogeochemical cycles. And so composting harnesses natural soil formation processes that occur in convergence of these cycles. It's really the heart of it all. And I'm not going to go too much into detail about all of these, because that's kind of what the whole the field of environmental science is, really explaining these, understanding these, and it's a lot more complex in reality on the ground than in this diagram, but it shows how interconnected the atmosphere, water, geology, rocks, minerals, and the biosphere, living things are. And so when you're composting, there's a lot of variables and social ecological interactions converging with the soil and compost. But main variables that we want to pay attention to are our carbon to nitrogen ratio, temperature, water, oxygen, particle size, pH, and soil biology. And when you're composting, you're kind of hoping to find the kind of Goldilocks situation of all of these. And I'll go into that. So what can we compost? Pretty much anything. You want to pay attention when you're adding to your compost, your carbon sources, which are going to be your brown ingredients. So that can look like any sort of dry organic matter with a relatively higher content of carbon, so nitrogen or other nutrients, for instance. So leaves, paper, cardboard, plant stalks and stems, wood chips, natural fabrics even, and sawdust. And then your nitrogen sources, those are commonly referred to as your green ingredients. And so that's a lot of what is like freshly dead material. So fresh fruit and vegetables, fresh plant trimmings, grass clippings, coffee grounds, spent tea. And you can also add cool, like different additives that are maybe harder to find naturally, but you can go buy at the store, like blood meal that has a really high content of nitrogen. Urine and manure and weeds even, but I add little asterisks by them because it can be kind of difficult and dangerous to compost. They can spread pathogens, or you might be able, like this weed seeds might live on in the compost. But there's composting techniques to mitigate that. So general guidelines for composting is you want to source diverse ingredients for a diverse like nutrient profile of the compost. Biodegradable, obviously. You don't really want to be spreading pollutants in the environment, so free of pollutants or pathogens, but we'll get into that. Minimally processed materials, so yeah, neutral pH. Most soils have a pH of 7, so neutral, but it really has evolved differently in different regions, and different plants are adapted to different pHs. And you want to have an approximate sum carbon to nitrogen ratio of 30:1. Now we're getting into composting methods. So there's kind of two main decomposition environments that have been adopted as like compost methods. So there's thermophilic composting, which is your hot compost. This is highly aerobic and oxygen rich. It's where thermophilic soil organisms thrive. And that's between 104 degrees and 160 degrees Fahrenheit. This is often your early phase of composting. And then over time, it cools with maturation. And when it gets this hot, it'll often kill pathogens and seeds, like weed seeds, viruses, eggs, and things like that. And you have faster decomposition when you compost thermophilically. That can look like weeks to months. But you need quite a bit of material to have it heat up. So at least like a 3 foot by 3 foot pile. And then you have mesophilic composting, which is your static or cold compost. And so in these environments, they're moderate to low oxygen. Mesophilic soil organisms thrive. So worms and such will be happy in this compost, whereas in a really hot compost, the worms don't really like it. And that's going to be 68 degrees to 104 degrees Fahrenheit. But it's slower. It takes months to years. But it requires less labor, less input, less materials, like everything pretty much decomposes mesophilically. It happens all the time, everywhere. But thermophilic composting, you're creating a really special environment that's like a feast for these organisms to come and reproduce and decompose your stuff. And so this is a soil thermometer in a compost pile showing like about 120 degrees Fahrenheit. So that would be thermophilic composting in action. And so there's different types of compost systems. First one I want to talk about is industrial or municipal composting. And that's like when you put your food or yard waste in the bin and it's picked up by the municipal composters. And it's often government subsidized, but private contractors are doing the composting. It's very large scale in thermophilic composting. They have like, as you can see, huge machines to help break down material, grind it up, and turn piles, so you're not out there with a pitchfork. And you have to pay to participate, so you're paying into this program to come pick up your food waste, but then you also have to pay for the composting product. Like you can go to your municipal composting facility and buy compost. But you don't really know exactly about like what's in it. And then there's community composting, and that is composting that occurs on like shared land, often at like farms or community gardens, and it's a shared responsibility of doing the composting, turning it, and adding materials. And I actually engaged in this form of composting with my workshops, which I'll talk more about later, at the WW Outback Farm. And then there's also single household composting. It can look like a lot of different things. It's your individual responsibility to take care of this compost. You do often need access to at least a small amount of land. It can be really big, like that pile, or kind of smaller. That's a tumbler, and that helps facilitate aeration. And single household composting is often mesophilic. You're kind of just putting stuff out to decompose. Okay. And so why does this matter? Well, about a third of the food produced globally gets thrown into landfills or gets incinerated before it's even bought by consumers, according to the EPA. And that ties into a lot of issues about like food access and problems with distribution of food and costs, but also biodiversity and topsoil loss around the globe. We're in the middle of kind of a mass extinction, if you didn't know. And it's really because we live in a modern industrial consumer society where we're taking a lot, we're extracting a lot from the land, we're demanding from it, and we're not really returning this material and these nutrients back in the form of compost and soil. Moreover, according to the EPA in the US, organic waste makes up 24% of municipal solid waste disposed of in landfills. And municipal solid waste landfills rank as the third largest source of methane emissions caused by human activity. So it's a big cause to global climate change. And 58% of this methane comes from anaerobic decomposition of organic material. So when you throw out food in the trash, you're burying it basically in plastic, and it decomposes very, very slowly over time with anaerobic decomposition. And byproduct of that is methane. Whereas if you're composting aerobically, methane is still produced, but not as much. And so for my project, I really wanted to spread mindful waste habits and participate in climate action and help people participate in climate action. And so I held